We know that one of the main focus of NEP is on outcome-based education and to make students skillful professional. Now, outcome-based education is also very important parameter for higher education accreditation. So our next talk is on outcome-based education from Dr. Jeril Tom, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, SB College, Kerala. He will be talking on constructive alignment and outcome-based education evaluation. Sir, please.
Sir, kindly unmute your audio.
Yes. I hope my PPT is visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I am Jeril. I work with the St. Berthman's College, Changanasheri. As we all know, we are in the process of transiting to the new education policy, and many of us are in the process of designing and transiting to the curriculum and syllabi based on outcome-based education. And many of us are already into the task of designing syllabus and the structure of the program for the requirements of OBE. And OBE essentially is outcome based. It should be observable, it should be explicit, tangible, and
Sir,
it should.
Jeril, sir, sorry to interrupt. Can you change to slideshow, your mode?
Okay, okay.
Change your PPT to slideshow.
Yes. So it should be observable, it should be tangible, it should be explicit, and it should assess different domains of the process of education: cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domains of education. Now, OBE essentially addresses program educational objectives, program learning outcomes, course learning outcomes, and unit learning outcomes. Program educational objectives are long-term goals of education, which we expect to realize within 3 to 5 years after graduation. And program learning outcome is the outcomes which are expected to realize upon graduation, and course learning outcome is expected to realize after completion of each course. And the unit learning outcome is expected to get realized after the completion of each unit. So from units to courses to programs and for program educational outcomes. So that's a hierarchy of doing it. Now, outcome-based education should have learning outcomes which are explicit, which are visible, and the alignment of the assessment with the learning outcomes is quite important. The delivery of the learning materials, resources, or the process of learning should be in alignment with the learning outcomes, and there should have infrastructure and support system, the resources, the material, the laboratory, the practical part, the assessment, internal assessment part, the external assessment part. These support systems should there to provide delivery of the teaching and learning process to which is in consistency with the learning outcomes. Now, OBE is based upon the principle of clarity. It is keeping a high expectation on the process of learning from the part of the students, and it should expand opportunity. It is essentially designing down. Designing down means we are actually designing the curriculum and syllabi based on the outcomes, and we are moving back. The conventional approach to curriculum and the process of teaching and learning is to choose a text, identify the chapters covered, develop a lecture or learning materials, and create an exam. The assessment process is at the end, and we are less concerned about whether the student has achieved a actual skill. Now in OBE, the outcomes are identified initially, and we determine the process of assessment, and we design learning activities and the curriculum to cater for the outcomes and assessment process. So we are having a bottom-up approach in OBE. So OBE begins with the end in mind, and we should do what we say and say what we do. So if you say that upon the completion of the course, the student will be able to do some task or perform some role, we are planning the process of teaching and learning to make those students to do that. Okay, so we deliver what we do in OBE. There are three key processes in OBE. The first one is establishing the intended learning outcomes, which is quite important, and this should be in consistency with the industrial requirements, with the changes in the discipline, with the standards we desire to achieve. And the second process is the designing appropriate learning and teaching activities that enable learners to meet those
Hello,
outcomes.
sir.
Yes.
Jeril, sir, your slide remains the same. It's not changing. Can you switch to slideshow? Yes. Okay.
Yes, the second process is to design appropriate learning and teaching activities that enables the learners to meet those outcomes. It can be lectures, it can be field visits, it can be projects, it can be mini projects, it can be uh, a host of activities, a host of process, including the end semester examination and a group of continuous and comprehensive methods of evaluation. Now, the third process is designing appropriate assessment methods through which learners can demonstrate that they have met the outcomes. So, we are essentially designing a test of skill of the learners, whether they have acquired these skills after the process of learning is done. Now, constructive alignment is a concept which was developed by John Biggs. He's a Tasmanian educational psychologist, and he's also he also has the credit of developing solo taxonomy and teaching for quality learning at university is one of his popular works in this area. Now, constructive alignment is based on the constructivist theory, which asserts that learners using their own activity construct their knowledge as interpreted through their own existing schemata. So alignment is actually the principle in curriculum theory that assessment tasks should be in alignment with what is intended to be learned. So learning outcomes and the process of learning and the process of evaluation, all these three should be in alignment. So that's essentially what constructive alignment means. So what student does, what skills they have acquired is rather more important than what is being taught or what the teacher does. Now let's go for some formal definition. Constructive alignment is a design for teaching in which what it is intended students should learn and how they should express their learning is clearly stated before teaching take place. So the intention is stated a priori. Teaching is then designed to engage students in learning activities that optimizes their chances of achieving those outcomes. So teaching and learning activities are designed keeping in mind the outcomes. And assessment tasks are designed to enable clear judgment as to how well this outcome has been attained. And see, the assessment process is not simply an examination or not simply a um, benchmark based test, but it is in alignment with the intended outcomes, and it should clearly judge whether the student has attained those outcomes or not. Now, if we plot a chart of engagement, student engagement based on the teaching methods, which range from a passive level of student activity to active level of student activity, we can hierarchize the level of engagement into note taking, memorizing, note taking, describing, explaining, relating, applying, and theorizing. And the bottom left of this graph shows a lower level of achievement, engagement, as well as passive student activity. And as we move right to the graph, the student activity is moving from passive to active, and as we move up, the engagement level is high. So we intend to, so normatively ideal points lie in this graph, in the top right side of this graph. So if we find a gap between high level of achievement and active high level of achievement, that gap need to be addressed in our teaching and learning process. So there are three levels of thinking about teaching. In level 1, we can think of differences in learning are due to differences between students, due to cognitive differences between students because of difference in mental abilities, difference in their capabilities, difference in their intelligence or math skills. This can be one way of thinking about teaching. The other way of thinking about teaching is what the teacher is doing, rather than what the student has to deal with. So essentially, teaching is a process which is centered around teacher and design of the instructional material and the delivery of instructional material. And in the third way of doing it is what the student does and how it relates to teaching, and how the process of teaching and learning is related with what the student does, what the student perform, what the student is able to do. Now, constructive alignment is designed to elicit, decide some verbs which may be realized using large class activities or small class activities. And it can be teacher managed, peer managed, or self managed. It can be classroom based or outside classroom, whichever is suitable. Now, the assessment should be clearly reflecting the quality of attainment of learning outcomes. Okay, so the intended learning outcomes can be described in some certain verbs, which ranges from low hierarchical verbs to high hierarchical verbs. Low hierarchical verbs can be to describe, elaborate, or classify, and to the next level would include solve or analyze or evaluate or justify, to high hierarchical verbs like generate, create, or review things. Now, steps in constructive alignment is to define graduate attributes, to define program learning outcomes, to define course learning outcomes, and to define topic or unit learning outcomes. Program learning outcomes are statements on what skills the students will have upon graduation. So it should be in line with the program standards or professional bodies like UGC or NBA or NHA. Course learning outcomes so SMART is a norm to describe the desirable traits of a course learning outcomes. It should be specific, it should be measurable, it should be actionable, it should be relevant, and it should be timed. So course learning outcomes should be SMART. Now, let's see what are the components of a course outcome. It should have an action verb. Action verb is a verb that describe what the learner will be able to do after being through the process of teaching and learning. Okay, it should be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and it should be realizable in a time frame, and it should be observable. It should be brought under assessment process. Okay, so for example, describe the principle used in designing something. Evaluate the strength and weakness of some policy or some process. So here we have the terms describe, evaluate. These verbs are action verbs. Okay, so if someone is able to describe the principle of the functioning of some machine, or evaluate the strength and weakness of a policy, it is a capability, it's a skill, it's an action which a student is supposed to perform upon completion of the course. And we should avoid vague terms in describing the course outcomes. Now, now the course outcome can have a condition. Condition means how the action should be done. For example, if we are saying describe the principle used in designing X, designing some component or equipment, we are actually using a action verb only. So describe is the action verb here we have used. So the student is supposed to understand the principle of designing, let's say, some diesel engine. Okay. The second one, let's say the second one, orally describe the principle used in designing X. So there is a condition to it: orally design, orally describe, or graphically describe. So the condition is how to describe the principle, how to do it. So so if we have a verb as well as a condition attached to it, the outcome becomes more precise. Okay. Design a beam. Design a beam is a high-end question. It's an action verb, design. The second one, design a beam using Microsoft Excel design template. Okay, so we are giving a condition. The design should be made using MS Excel. Okay, so an action verb as well as a condition. Now we can have a prescribe a standard or a acceptable level of performance of this action. Okay, so describe the principle used in designing X, designing some equipment or machine or some process. Anyway, that's simply using an action verb. Orally describe the principle used in designing X. So we are having an action verb as well as a condition. Orally describe the 5 principles used in designing X. So we are becoming more specific. So we are moving from generally stating the outcome to being very specific. Okay, so we have set a standard. You should describe orally the 5 principles. Okay, so the 5 principles should be a predetermined standard of designing the process X. Okay, so in a similar way we can tell about the second outcome as well. Design a concrete beam. Design a concrete beam using MS Excel. Design a concrete beam using MS Excel based on some predetermined standard. So we are having an action verb, a condition, as well as a standard prescribed. Now let's see some of the common weaknesses in writing course outcomes. If the course outcomes are non-observable or non-measurable, we are left with lesser options in assessing those outcomes. Okay. For example, if we are writing understand the theory of X, know how to write an effective learning outcome, appreciate the importance of keeping the environment clean. These are actually vague outcomes. Okay, or these are too broad or too general. So we need to be very specific in defining the course outcomes. Okay, by the end of the course, the student should be able to use the computer, make presentation, comment on designs or design research. These are actually very vague course outcomes. Let's see how these can be rephrased to make them better. Okay, students will understand how to use technology effectively. So this is a very general statement. So here we haven't specified what sort of technology and at what level of understanding should the student be normatively have after completion of this course. So we can make it better. Students will be able to use word processing, spreadsheets, databases, and presentation graphics in preparing their final research project and report. So here we are very specific about the technology that the students will be taught. Okay, so it includes word processing, spreadsheets, databases, and presentation graphics. So instead of using the use of technology, we have specified what all technologies are being used. And we are also stating that in preparing their final research project and report, so they actually acquired that skill in an applicative way. Now let's see another example. Students will demonstrate knowledge of the history, literature, and function of the theater, including works from various periods and culture. So we can make better. Students will be able to explain the theoretical basis of various dramatic genres and illustrate them with examples from plays of different arts. Okay, so illustrate them means you are learning to perform. Okay, so you will be able to demonstrate. You will be able to explain. Okay, so instead of having the knowledge of it, you will be able to explain it. Okay, so to explain is a performance. Acquiring a knowledge and keeping it in your mind is not an outcome. Okay, so to have the knowledge is a prerequisite, of course, but to act upon that knowledge is what required in OBE. Students will be able to understand the economic environment of business. Students will be able to analyze the impact of economic environment on business. Okay, so analyzing is rather a hierarchical verb. Okay, understanding is simply grasping the idea. Analyzing means you examine and you inspect the economic environment on business in real terms. Students will be able to know the 7 steps of research process. Students will be able to describe the 7 steps of the research process and then when writing a paper. Okay, knowing means you are learning. Describing is a task. Okay, to spell out in verbal terms, and we have added to use that research process when writing a paper. So it has applicative value as well. Another example, I think let's skip a couple of examples. Okay, writing the intended learning outcomes. So we should incorporate verbs in intended learning outcomes. We can use several sets of theoretical constructs which are available in the literature, and the most popular one is the Bloom's revised taxonomy. There are other taxonomies like Solo taxonomy, Krathwohl taxonomy, Simpson taxonomy. We can set some of these taxonomies as guidelines. These taxonomies are actually a set of verbs which describe actions which are arranged on the basis of hierarchy to denote the order of the process of learning, the extent to which you learn a subject. Okay, so low level verbs will be describing, identifying, or memorizing, and high end verbs will be developing or solving or creating or reflecting on what you have learned. So Bloom's taxonomy, the initial Bloom's taxonomy is like this: knowledge. So let's move from the bottom of the pyramid to the top. Knowledge, understand, application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation. And this taxonomy
Sir,
was revised in 2001
sir,
to.
please. Sir, you have 5 minutes more.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have revised the taxonomy this way: remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. Okay. So let me demonstrate some examples in which these action verbs are used. Knowledge or remembering. Knowledge or remembering is recalling some information you have learned, like recalling some definitions or recalling some major ideas or dates or place or names. Okay, so it can be a question can be write a list of vegetables. So you have learned a set of vegetables and you memorize it and recall it. Comprehension or understanding. Understanding is the second level, where you summarize, describe, interpret, or associate, or predict, or distinguish, or interpret things, compare things. Retell the story of the Rapunzel in your own words. So it is not memorize and write down the story. It's like recall and produce it in your own words. So if you have understood that story, you can reproduce in your own words. It's not like you are by hearting it and reproducing it. Now, applying can be demonstrating, calculating, solving, or relating or experimenting on some task. Make a model of a swing with paper and explain how it works. Questions for applying. Do you know of another instance where? So you are relating something what you have studied to some situation. Can you group by characteristics such as you will be able to group things based on some classification taxonomy you have already learned. Which factors would you change if? So you are essentially streamlining a policy to fit into some situation. What questions would you ask for? So if you want to question something or to inquire about something, you are essentially applying what you have learned in a real world situation, and you are normatively viewing it to make it better, or what are the issues. So if we are thinking in that way, we are essentially applying the knowledge. Now, analyzing involves ordering, explaining, connecting, classifying, arranging, and making inferences on what you have already learned. Make a family tree showing relationship. Questions for analyze: which events could not have happened. How is something similar to what? So you are contrasting something with another. Why did some changes occur? What are some of the problems of? Can you distinguish between what were some of the motives behind? What was the turning point? What was the problem with some policies? So you are essentially critically evaluating or assessing some process or policies or some mechanisms and um, analyzing it. Evaluation is assessing, ranking, grading, judging, comparing, summarizing. These all can be evaluating depending upon which discipline you are talking about. And the final one is synthesis or creating. Can you design a plan for a home? Can you see a possible solution to the problem of solid waste management? So can you devise your own way to handle a situation of managing something? Okay, so these are the very higher end questions where you essentially apply your knowledge and create something or synthesize your knowledge to produce some innovative ideas to manage some situations. So I have told you about Simpson taxonomy. This is Simpson taxonomy, and this one is Krathwohl taxonomy. These are not as popular as Weiss-Bloom's taxonomy. Weiss-Bloom's taxonomy is quite popular. So essentially, so let me conclude. Essentially, OBE is a transition from grade oriented to outcome oriented, a transition from content based to ability based, and a transition from lecture centered to student centered. So let me finish my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for decoding outcome-based evaluation. The session is open for questions. If you have any comments or question, please type. You are describing in detail PLO, CLO, and TLO. Program learning outcome, course learning outcome, and topic learning outcome. Students and sometimes even teachers, they usually think it's the same. But you are describing in detail what is the peculiarity of each terms. So if there is no other question, thank you very much, sir, for this informative session.